Well, good evening, and a really warm welcome to Something Better this evening. This is a weekend of talks and events that we're putting on here at St Andrew the Great Church. My name's Becca, and I'm a member of staff here, and you're really welcome this evening. And welcome to you if you're joining us on the live stream. We hope that these events over this whole weekend are just a chance to investigate for ourselves some of those big questions of life, whether we identify as a Christian or not, just to kind of question some of those big things that we want to explore. In particular, Jesus' claim that he comes to offer life to the full. This evening, we're really pleased to be joined by Andrew Sach. Andrew's got a kind of background in neuroscience. He studied here in Cambridge as an undergraduate and is now a pastor in London. And he's author of the book, Are You 100% Sure You Want to Be an Agnostic? The way this evening's going to run is Andrew's going to interview Graham Daniels, who's a member of our church family here, and then he'll speak to us for about half an hour. It'll be all over by 9:15, and the only other thing you might need to know from me is that the loos are kind of at the back and on the right. I'll hand over to Andrew now.
This is your church, but I'm interviewing you, so we'll see how this goes. I know you are director of a Christian charity called Christians in Sport. You're also director of Cambridge United. How's the season going?
Well, it's just gone. It's been lovely. For those poor people who don't like football at all, there are 4 levels of football in this country, so you all know the Premier League. And then there are 3 more, and Cambridge went from the 4th to the 3rd this year, and we sustained a place in the 3rd tier of the league, so we're happy. We're content about it. Yeah.
And you're particularly happy if there's any Geordies here, I understand.
Particularly happy for what?
If there's any Geordies amongst us.
Oh, no, that would be mean. I mean, that would just be mean. It's the FA Cup final tomorrow, which is the major cup competition in the country. But it means that the smaller teams play the very, very big Premier League teams if you get the right draw. So Cambridge United drew the richest football team in the world now, because they're owned by, I think, a Saudi conglomerate of some kind.
Because if you're owned by Russian, that's less good right now, but the Saudis...
That's not good at all anymore, no. But we played Newcastle at Newcastle, so we were thinking, well, if we lose by less than 4, that'll be respectable. And then at half-time, it was 0-0, and we said, well, it might be 2. That would be really respectable. Then we scored a goal, and then we were watching the clock and thinking, this is going to be more than respectable, we're going to win. And we did, so we beat Newcastle, which gave us 5 minutes of fame, and then we'll try and do that next year against somebody even better, like Arsenal or something. Yeah, so no, seriously, it's been a nice year. The biggest thing about it's like any hobby's a bit not quite right, but anything that you do in everyday life that's outside of your job, that you do with people that you really like being with and really enjoy their company. For some of us, that's sport. Of course, that's what it is for me, and I love it. I love the companionship, the friendship that goes with the game. That's the best thing about it.
You got into football because you played yourself at university and then you played professionally. And tell us about the highlights of your own football career.
That won't take long. Look, if you want, I'll give you a snapshot, Andrew. I'll give you, here it is in one story. In 1983, which obviously is forever ago, when I was a boy, Cambridge, I'd moved from Cardiff in Wales to Cambridge to play football, and Cambridge were in the 2nd tier, or the championship as it's called, and I came at the start of the season. We did okay for a month, and then in October we started a run that lasted from October 83 to March 84, October, November, December, January, February, 6 months, and in that period we played 31 games. This is in the Guinness Book of Records. This is in the record book. We played 31 games, we drew 4, and we lost 27. And you'd be proud to know, Andrew, that I played in all of them. So that was my football career concept. That's it in a nutshell. There it was.
So that's how you got into football. How did you get into Jesus?
Well, that was sport, of course, inevitable, isn't it, really? I didn't know anything, really, about this kind of stuff. Not really. And here's what happened. I was in year 10 at school. I was 15 years of age. And it was a May day, so many years ago, on a May afternoon. And at 5 minutes to 12, there was a knock on the door, and it was a guy in year 13, 18-year-old, top year of school, king of school, really, best at rugby, best at cricket, best athlete, bit of a beard. He was a man, and he knocked my door, my class, and said, "Is Graham Daniels here, please, sir?" So I thought, wow, when you're 15, 18, wow, the king of school wants me. What have I done to deserve this? So he said, yes. I said, yeah. And he said, can you go and get your cricket uniform kit? You're playing the team this afternoon for the school. I'm thinking, double physics and maths. How good am I in the school cricket team? So I run home, get my stuff, run back to school, jump on the bus, 50-mile journey to a place called Cardiff. Off we go to Cardiff. If you don't like cricket, which is pretty much everyone, just in case you do, I was third man and I didn't bat. So I was there to make up the numbers. That's what I was there for, to make up a number. I was just a spare man. Anyway, I asked why I was picked, and he was very polite, and he said, "Oh, it's just nice to have you in the team. It's lovely to have a younger player playing." I said, "Oh, super." I said, "But I am surprised to be picked, really bragging. Tell me how good I am." And he said, "No, it's just enjoy the day. Just enjoy the game." And in the end, I said once more, I said, "Yeah, but I'd love to know why I was picked." And he said, "Well, look," he said, "there's 600 boys in this school." He said, "I called you at 5 to 12. What time did the bus leave?" I said, 12 past. He said, "You got your kit, came back, jumped on the bus." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Does anyone live closer to school than you?" Anyway, to cut to the point, after the game, it was a Monday, and he said to me, "Oh, what did you do at the weekend?" He'd scored 90 runs, took 5 wickets. He won the game single-handedly. He said, "What did you do at the weekend?" I said, "Oh, I played cricket Saturday, did nothing Sunday," because it was the 70s in Wales and everything was shut. Nothing on the telly. And I said, "What did you do Sunday?" He said, "Oh, I went to church. I played cricket Saturday. I went to church Sunday." And I looked at him and I thought, what? You're a proper athlete. You're the best athlete in school. What? Oh, I lost all respect for him straight away. I said, "What do you go to church for? Does your mother still make you go to church at 18? And then he says, "No," and he blushed a bit. He said, no. He said, "I go to church because I follow Jesus." And I said to myself, 45 miles to go. I'm trapped next to a lunatic. I'm next to a lunatic. That bloke kept in touch with me, pre-emails and mobiles and all that. He kept in touch with me for 6 years when I left home and moved from Wales to Cambridge. And then the final bit of that long story is that, funnily enough, Cambridge were playing away at Newcastle many years before the FA Cup game. And my boyhood hero, you won't know him, but it was a man called 𝘋𝘰🯋. So when I was a boy, he was a very, very famous player. He was in the last year of his career, and he was playing for Newcastle. They were top of the second tier. We were bottom. And we played at Newcastle, and our right winger did something incredible. He beat the full-back for the first time in months, and he went past him, and he crossed it, and I ran to the far post, and the ball came, and I swung my leg at it, and it went in. So I'd scored. It was the best moment of my life, 40,000 people, scoring a goal against my boyhood hero. I thought all my life had come together, 22. And then on a Tuesday night, we had a game in London, against a small team called Brentford. They were small at the time. And I said to myself, what an anticlimax this is. Will my life always feel this much of an anticlimax after the best day of my life on Saturday? And then it dissipated like hot sand through my fingers. That started the process of thinking about the bigger picture that my friend espoused. Sorry, that was a long answer.
So you were thinking football, I thought it was everything, and it wasn't everything. And then what, you got back in touch with your friend, or what happened next?
Yeah, I was in Cambridge, didn't really know anyone. My girlfriend, who became my wife, Michelle, she was in Wales finishing her studies. And so when you play football every day, it only takes about 2 hours to go to work. So I was I had nothing to do in the afternoons, really. And after that event, I thought, I really admired my friend. He was a brilliant guy, really competitive, always wanted to win, really good player. But as I watched him over a few years before leaving home, he failed, he lost his temper, he got things wrong. There was plenty wrong with him, but boy, he was the boy who'd say sorry. He'd apologize to people. No one else said sorry for things, and he'd say, sorry about that, shouldn't have done that. He was the guy who never talked behind somebody's back. I loved him. He was the guy who would tell you to your face if he thought there was something wrong. Oh, he was great. And I admired him, and I thought it must be his faith, obviously. So I started reading about Jesus, and there was a talk here last night, which I listened to online, about evidence to prove the veracity, the truth of the New Testament, the death and resurrection of Jesus. And I just read books. I went and bought books. And after about 6 months, I was in my room where I was living, and I thought, I need to be a Christian. I believe that this is really true about God revealing himself through Christ and his death and resurrection. So I thought I had to believe it. I went to work the next day, and the boy said, what did you do last night? Taffy, which is a nickname for a Welshman. And what did you do last night, mate? I thought, oh. And I'd said to God, I want to be a Christian. And you can imagine the words that came to my mouth, right? I was back on a bus from being 15. And the only thing I could think of saying was, I decided to follow Jesus. And the whole changing room went quiet. And the physiotherapist room was just off the changing room, and his name was Pete, and somebody said, Pete, the pressure's got to Dano. Hurry up. His head's gone. And that was it. I was off and running, really. 22 or 23 maybe.
So this shock, so your impression, you met this guy at school, he said he's a Christian, and you go, that you're a loser. And I guess, your teammates also thought you'd lost your mind. A lot of people think, don't they? I mean, football, exciting, church, tedious. You've obviously found differently. I guess in your work for Christians in Sport, you've met a lot of people at the top of their game in all sorts of elite sports. Have you seen the same picture where people have thought, this is exciting, but it doesn't deliver, and this emptiness that somehow Jesus fills?
In one sense, of course, everyone's individual and unique. I've spent a lot of my life in this field, in this work, and effectively in my 30s through the 90s, I started working with a lot of footballers, many of whom are now managers and coaches, as a Christian myself. I'll answer briefly because I'm speaking too long. Here's two things that are expected of you if you're a professional athlete, certainly in football, but as a professional athlete actually. Number one, from the smallest, the youngest age, it's indoctrinated into you that if you make it on the tennis tour, track and field, Diamond League, Olympics, professional football, if you can make it, you will find fulfillment. Very hard to understand for a young person or an adult who's not got a gift that is sort of culturally loved. It could be a musician, it could be the arts, of course, definitely. But I know sport, and a child is told all the time, you're the best in the class, you're the best in school, you're the best in the city, you're the best in the region, you're the best in the country. By the time you're a teenager, you are going to make it. And you don't know any different, and that will be the goal, that'll make life valuable. Now, there's two of two. The second one is, if you win all the time at 7, then 8, then 10, then 12, then 14, often the best children have never lost at anything in the sport that they play. They've never lost at 15. They beat everybody. Your security comes from winning. You are safe as a human being. You can sleep at night because you won again. But you know what happens, obviously. You've got to lose. The higher you go, the more the people are as good as you, and two things fall apart very quick. You lose your fulfillment from sport, you become cynical, and you lose your security, you become deeply insecure inside. So that's the trajectory of the elite athlete, for sure. for certain. I've seen it 1,000 times.
And so much so that it's become a kind of recognised mental health challenge in sport.
Yeah, in the last decade, for sure. Forgive the very detailed thing, but in professional football, there's something called the Elite Player Performance Plan, which the Premier League and the footballing authorities brought out in 2012 to take account of two things. One, technically trying to get more English players through the system to be as good as other nations. Number two, though, to try and find the best way to help young professional footballers cope with those two things we've described. So there's been a movement for 10 years to try and fix that.
If someone's being cynical, they might say, but isn't religion just sort of propping people up psychologically? Because there's these mental health problems, life's tough, sometimes you lose. Here's this kind of all-accepting heaven in the end of it, sort of opium of the people. What would you must have met that kind of cynicism. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say on one level, that's right. I wouldn't argue against that on one level. Is there anyone in the room, I'm looking at you, not at other people, but is there anyone in the world who doesn't need propping up sometime? That's just so obvious, isn't it? You've got to have some vanity about you if you don't think you ever need propping up. And certainly professional sports people are exactly the same. The stresses are huge, the pressures, yeah. So on one sense, yes, God does do that. But there's something much, not more significant, but more objective. The question is, as I've lived longer and met more people and talked about this and spent my life in football, it's a pretty basic, axiomatic question, really, which is there a God or not? Well, if he's there and he helps you, grand, obviously. But what counts is that he's there. So you can't go much further than ask probably two questions. Is there a God or not? It's one or the other. And if there is, can we find out about him? Can we know about him? So, in answer, yes, he does prop you up because he's very kind. But that's not to say you make him up. That's the question.
And what would you say your faith is based in? So how do you know there's a God who can support you, and what's your own experience of that?
When I played that game, it was a personal experience, of course, because it was huge joy, and then an anticlimax of, is that it? Well, I always feel like that if I get to the next goal and the next goal. So there was sort of an experiential thing for me. But then it got me reading and thinking. I was supposed to do law at university. I was talking to a friend on the way in. I was thinking the same way. But when I got to Cardiff, I found out that you were in lectures all the time if you did that, which was a bad idea because you couldn't play football. So I switched to philosophy, which had 3 lectures a week and 2 seminars. So funnily enough, that period as an undergrad while playing football every day really helped because I loved the philosophy. Forgive me if you're a serious philosopher, but it was the laziest degree in the world as an undergrad. But I loved it. I was terribly cynical about God and things, of course, but actually it helped me to think. So by the time I'd left and come to live here and work, I was pretty convinced that though you couldn't prove this one way or another, the existence of God was a much more likely hypothesis than that he didn't exist. So it's not exactly empirical, of course, but it was a judgment, a more objective judgment. But the second part of it was, how could you know? What could you do to find out? Okay, you can go on a hunch, there's a God, but how could you know? So I read around, but I read the New Testament. As a Welsh kid, age 60 now, of course you're used to the Bible and Bible stories at school and all that. But I read the 4 accounts of the life of Jesus. I read them. Oh my word, it was electric. I'd never read them. I'd never read them. And then I'm reading, this is a historical claim. This is an empirical thing. Was he alive? Did he live? Where was he? What did he do? What about the evidence? What about the literature? And I read about the death of Jesus. I read about the resurrection, which of course is absurd because nobody beats death. And the moment when I told you that story about going to work the next day, I read a line by a guy who was a radical Christian convert after murdering Christians, a guy called Paul, who writes a lot of the New Testament letters as he travels to tell people about Christ. And he writes a line to a church in Greece, in Corinth, and he says, if Christ didn't rise from the dead, he writes to Christians, your faith is futile, and you're still in your sins. I read it again. I thought, he's writing this to people who are Christians. If Christ didn't beat death, your faith is a waste of space, and you're still in your sins and not in a relationship with God. And that was it. That was back to my undergrad philosophy. I thought, well, if he's right and Christ didn't beat death, all Christianity is nonsense because it can't point you to who God is. On the other hand, if he did beat death, then the pathway to God is clear, and Christ is the path to God. And meeting Christ is access to the divine because he is God, and he beat death. And that was my tipping point. That was it. I mean, I'd read around it, but I read it in its raw and thought, is it true or false? Well, I think there is a God. Is Jesus God who became a man and died and beat death for me so that I could have a relationship restored with God because I've rebelled against him, which was the gospel's story? And I went, yeah, it's true. So all I've said to friends ever since is, do the data. If you're serious about this, don't just have banter, put your brain in gear, because it's a pretty important question.
And that verse you mentioned from the New Testament about Jesus defeating death, and if he didn't defeat death, we're still in our sins. That's maybe a good segue into thinking about, on the one hand, Jesus offering life and fulfillment and the life that we're made for. He's also saying he can deal with sins, whatever, and that's sort of a very old-fashioned word it's become. But I wanted to take a different angle onto football and actually the history of sport, the history of the church as well. And that's some of the abuse scandals that have been coming to light. And there's been abuse in the church, and there's been abuse within football. And it reveals maybe some of the darkest and ugliest side of human nature. I guess in your work with Christians in sport, you've been dealing with all sorts of sportsmen, sports teams. What's it been like as a Christian now to look at some of the horrible things that have gone on under our nose, and how do you process that as a Christian?
Yeah, I mean, there have been horrible stories of abuse in football, and it would have been in my generation primarily, 80s and 90s. So I think of a boy who was a Christian and a very good player, had a long career. And when this scandal came out in the last couple of years, he phoned me in tough boy, good bloke, crying his eyes out on the phone. And he's sobbing, couldn't tell me about it, so I thought he'd been abused by a coach. And he said, no, he said, it's worse than that. He said, I'm the cause of it. And he told me the story that as an 18-year-old, he was a first-year professional, and there was a kind of guy who they all thought was a bit weird, who worked for the club, but they all sort of made fun of him a bit, really. And my friend thought they were taking advantage of him by getting him to take them for meals and take them out in the car in the evenings because they all lived away from home. Two of the 4 or 5 boys who were in this cohort had killed themselves in their 20s. So some years ago. But my friend was the ringleader in getting them to come in the car and take advantage, as he saw it, of this chap. This chap was found to be an abuser many years later. And he realized this guy had picked them off. And he'd seen indications of it, but now it made sense. But he was the boy getting him in the car. So I've had loads of conversations about this era and these scandals.
I guess when we see that sort of stuff, and everyone's horrified by it, and you see it firsthand, it's extra horrifying.
Yeah.
What is the difference processing that as a Christian compared with if you're just an atheist or like some of your friends processing it?
Well, I think 2 things come to mind, Andrew. I mean, this seems a bit melodramatic, but I don't know. Look in the mirror before you look out of the window. I could easily talk about other people, but you look at yourself, and of course it's you can't air your dirty washing in public all the time. But you just have to look at yourself, and you think, well, thank God I wouldn't count myself in that category that I've just described. But there's enough nastiness in me, which pretty much nobody ever sees other than those who know me best. But I'm saying before I start looking at others, I'm looking at myself. And the first thing that occurred to me en route to Christian faith was making sense of the inbuilt preponderance, tendency to wrong things that were in me.
And that is quite an unusual response, isn't it? I mean, often in the tabloids we see abuse and go, those evil people over there.
Yeah.
But I mean, you were saying about your friend that first impressed you with his faith and how he used to say sorry and own up to stuff. I guess that is
Yeah, so maybe that was part of it. I've never thought of that. Seeing somebody who was humble. And I've since, I suppose, worked out there are words that look like religious words, but I found out in my 20s that the word repentance, which sounds a religious sort of term, literally meant a 180-degree turn. So it means actually saying, well, I'm going that way, but I'm going the wrong way. I need to turn around. That's repentance. Well, one of the things that struck me early on was I've always aspired to try and be a decent bloke, really. As we all do, don't we? We aspire to be good friends and family members and colleagues. But sometimes I've shocked myself at the way I feel or the way I think about people or the things I'd be willing to do, which I wouldn't want anyone to know about. So I don't want to be too dramatic about that, but I think you look in the mirror first. That's what struck me the most. And then secondly, making sense of the evil in the world isn't as simple as saying, well, if there's a God, why does he allow it? I mean, that is a profound question and one that's being addressed here tomorrow. It's a profound and serious and important question, but there's a risk of simplicity of it, because actually making sense of evil, sheer evil, seeing two gunmen shooting, pictures in the paper just today, shooting somebody walking away in the back, innocent people. What is that? I mean, what is that evil? How does that be? How do you abuse a 16-year-old boy when you're a 60-year-old man who's living 200 miles from home, and you pick him off and sexually abuse him? What is that? Why is there such wickedness? So whether you believe in God or not, or what questions we have about God, the reality of evil is something we have to stare straight at, front up, and look at it, because it's there. It's right in front of our eyes, and sadly, it's sometimes in my own heart, all too often. And that's my take on it.
And what hope does the Christian message offer to your friend who said, I wasn't just a victim, I was part of the problem, and actually, what, to somebody who knows the problem of evil's in here, what hope does the Christian message offer?
In the world I live in, I've lived in it all my life, in football, as part of my life. And achievement reigns everything, is king of all. Personal achievement, I can do it. Do it. Try harder. Be braver. Stick with it when you're losing. Come on. Resilience, toughness, hard work. Personal achievement. And in the city I live in and in the friends I have, and there's a lot of us whose lives, because of where we live and how we've grown up, are based rightly on playing our part in achieving things. I think it's a massive shock to the system when Jesus Christ comes along and you read his story and what he says. When he says things which are shocking on a weird level, really, on this level. When he says, whatever you can achieve in life, you will never, ever achieve a relationship with God because you've turned away from him and you can't have one. You're a zillion miles away from God. Somewhere in there, for me, was the shock of this. I guess I'd think, I'm not perfect, but I reckon, I'd get a good 2-2 with God. If it came to the crunch, maybe a 2-1. I know a lot of people who get a first, but I tell you what, I know loads of people who'd fail. Or they'd get a third for sure. They're not as good as me. And I think what dawns on you when you listen to the stories of the Bible, when you listen to what Jesus says, when you see him at work, is the growing understanding, experience that compared to God's standards, I'm so far away. That is unbelievably futile and vain and full of hubris for me to think, well, I'll pass the test if I need to. And it's at that point that I think I indicated that idea of repentance. So you think, well, I'm on my way to heaven if there is one, and I'll get there because I'm decent enough. And I'll keep trundling down the M11 and I'll get there. And you go, no, it's the wrong way. I've got to turn around. And that's where Christ stands enormous, because the only one who ever lived perfectly, the only one who always loved, never hated, never was vindictive, never lied, was never adulterous in his mind. He's the one who God sends into the world as his own son to die on a cross. And at that very moment when he beats death, and 3 days later when he smashes it, it's the moment where God says, all right, I am here, and now I've told you what I came to do for you. So it's more than I'm here. It's easy to discuss believing in God. It's saying, well, he's actually told us what he's done for us. And sin means, you do it with children, S, massive I in the middle, and N. Me in the middle. And Jesus says, put me in the middle. And then you'll have a relationship with your creator and maker. So look, I am a convert. That's why I'm on the stage. I love it. It's given me life. It's given me 40 years of a deep-seated, fundamental understanding of the meaning of the universe and my place in it. Small, tiny place in it, but with a great God who loves me and sets me up to live.
Graham, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. Should we give Graham a round of applause? Thank you. I'm going to stand up now for the next bit. It's not a sofa vibe, but a talk vibe. So, I want to share with you and answer this question: what if Jesus is the key to joy, and to a world that thinks, as Graham thought when he first found out his hero went to church on Sunday, isn't Christianity full of losers? Isn't Christianity boring? Maybe you're here because you suspect that. I think probably you're not. You're at least open-minded enough to come to see whether Christianity might be a key to joy. You're not absolutely firmly made up your mind that it's boring, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But what I'm going to do every one of these talks, and I don't know how many you're able to come to, but there's one now, tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, and then 2 on Sunday. For every one of the talks, I'm going to do the same thing, which is just open up this little book, which is a biography of Jesus written in the first century by a fisherman, written originally in Greek, now translated into English. And you've got one on your seat, and I'd love it if you picked it up, because everything I say is going to be from here. And I want us to look at this account of Jesus' life and just learn something about Jesus, something he did, something he said, something his perspective on reality. And then the reason I want to do that, well, there's two reasons. Firstly, I think you're going to find it a lot more interesting than you expect to. So I went to church when I was, age 9, because I joined the church choir. My piano teacher suggested I did. And I went through the motions of religious rituals, but I never really considered Jesus, and I never read the Bible kind of curiously, inquisitively as an adult. And when I did, it was a lot more interesting than I expected. And I think you're going to find the same. So we're going to get a little bit of the Bible open. We'll look at just one page of it pretty much tonight. I hope that will make you curious enough to want to read more. And if you can come back, we'll look at more of it over the week. If you've got questions like, why should I trust what the Bible says about Jesus to tell me about Jesus? Then I refer you to last night's talk. So we had a real expert here, Dr. Peter Williams. He's an expert in New Testament manuscripts and New Testament history. And he made lots of arguments. I'm not going to try and repeat them now. I do it less well than he did. The talk is on YouTube. I listened to it this afternoon on the car on the way here, and you could listen to that. But the reason I want to look here is because here is a biography of Jesus by one of Jesus' friends. And you might say, well, he's biased then. When people say you shouldn't read books about Jesus written by Christians, I sometimes think, well, you shouldn't read books about medicine written by doctors. I mean, doctors are biased. They believe in medicine. That's why they wrote the books. I mean, yeah, sure, John believes in Jesus. That's why he wrote the book. But you're kind of getting a perspective on Jesus by one of Jesus' friends, giving the take on Jesus that Jesus wanted you to receive. It's like the kind of authorized biography, the biography written by a friend. This is how kind of Jesus as he wants to be represented. So, rather than giving you my version of Jesus, I'm going to give you one of Jesus' best friends' version of Jesus, who was actually there, who saw what happened, who wrote it down. More information about the history, if you want it, on that YouTube talk. Anyway, enough preamble. We're looking at page 4. We're going to start there, and tonight we'll just be on this one page. It's quite a famous episode in Jesus' life. You've probably heard it before. I'm going to read it, and then we're going to look at a few surprises in the event. So where it says Jesus changes water into wine, which I hate as a title because it kind of gives away the suspense, doesn't it? Some editor has put the punchline there in bold, but that is what is about to happen. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They've got no more wine." Embarrassing. In other words, here is a wedding reception that has not been adequately planned, and they've run out of wine early on, and Jesus' mother has noticed the excruciatingly embarrassing scenario and nudged Jesus to try and help. "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to his servants, "Do whatever he tells you." So she's obviously got an inkling that he might be willing to help, even though his hour hasn't come. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 80 to 120 litres. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from, though the servants who'd drawn the water knew. In other words, Jesus didn't make a big song and dance about it. He did it discreetly, but there's enough eyewitnesses to be able to testify what had actually happened. He called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the plonk after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, you might well know this story. It's a very famous story. It's Jesus' first recorded miracle by John, his friend, the fisherman. Jesus goes to a wedding. He turns water into wine. And I put it to you, this is a very, very surprising thing for Jesus to do. Maybe you are quite surprised. And there's a couple of different reasons why it is surprising. I mean, the first thing is that you cannot ordinarily do this. And that's why people sort of plant vineyards and go to all sorts of trouble with vats and aging things in French oak and all this kind of thing. You can't normally make wine this way. I mean, I can. At least I'm going to try. So here's an empty wine glass, and here is some water, and hopefully, if I've got it all right, amazing. That was 2 years of a natural sciences degree. But I didn't turn water into wine. I turned phenolphthalein into a base solution. Phenolphthalein, for those of you who aren't chemists, is a very strong laxative. So I wouldn't suggest that you drank this water. I haven't done what Jesus has done because no one can do what Jesus has done. I mean, this is the first very surprising thing about it. It is not possible ordinarily to turn H₂O to C₂H₅OH plus vanillins and flavanols and anthocyanins and all the complex wine chemistry. You can't do it. Now, of course, at this point, some people just want to dismiss the Bible and dismiss Jesus out of hand because they say it is not scientifically possible to do this. Don't Christians realize anything about chemistry? We now know that this is not possible. It kind of misses the point, though, doesn't it? Because in the first century, they also knew that wasn't possible. You don't need 21st century levels of chemistry knowledge to know this is not how you make wine. Just like you don't need to know loads about Newtonian gravity to know that you can't walk on water at room temperature. Which is why when Jesus does things like this, people are, on the whole, quite surprised by it. They don't just go, oh, we don't understand chemistry, so fair enough. You know, this is very unusual. And I want to use the phrase, it's not impossible, but it's ordinarily impossible. And that is quite important. I think when the atheist says, well, this can't be done, so I'm going to dismiss it, there's actually some kind of circular thinking here. And I used to make this argument as an atheist, and I didn't spot my own circular reasoning. And the reasoning goes like this. Number one, there is no God, because I'm an atheist. Point two, if there is no God, then the laws of physics and chemistry are immutable, they can't be changed. And point three, the laws of chemistry tell you that you can't turn water into wine. Therefore, it didn't happen. Therefore, I can dismiss the Bible, right? But I smuggled in as a premise my conclusion, there is no God. Let's run the argument a different way. There is a God. The God who runs the universe sustains the universe in an orderly way so that normally water stays as water. Normally gravity is 9.81 meters per second on the surface of the earth. Normally dead people don't get back again from the dead. It's a one-way journey from life to death. You know, there's a whole load of consistency about the way that God runs the universe that we observe and describe, and that gives us science. But it doesn't mean that God couldn't, if he wanted to, do something differently. He just ordinarily doesn't do it differently. You know, the laws of science are just the description of what God does almost all of the time. But what about if there is a God and he comes to earth and he really wants to get your attention? Well, wouldn't that be exactly the right time to do something ordinarily impossible? Just to change the rules for that one episode. And Jesus, in this book, you'll find he breaks all sorts of rules. I think the miracle that gives the physicists the most headache, I just did this as a thought experiment, which of Jesus' miracles messes up the universe the most from a scientific point of view? I think it's actually the feeding of the 5,000. So Jesus starts with 5 bread rolls. There's a crowd of 5,000 people. He feeds all of them. And then, just to make it really clear, he collects up, at the end, more bread than they started with. So there's more leftovers than the original amount of bread. And so, for the physicists among you, that means that somehow there's just a lot more bread molecules or bread atoms than there were to start with. I mean, that's difficult, because how can you suddenly make that new atoms appear? And wouldn't that cause all... I mean, I don't even understand enough of the physics to know that the messes that would cause. But God does something that is really quite a headache for physicists, that ordinarily you can't do. Just think a minute. Actually, isn't that kind of the evidence that we would expect? So imagine I were to say to you, oh, well, good news, my name's Andrew, and I'm not just a pastor from Greenwich in London, I'm actually God. I made the universe, and you're really lucky to have me tonight. And you're sitting there thinking, I don't think you are God. I go, no, I am. And you say, well, prove it then. No, I can't prove it. I can't do anything unusual that the rest of you can't do, but trust me, I'm God. See, actually, a Jesus who didn't do any miracles wouldn't be more credible. Be very suspicious. If there is such a God as controls chemistry, I would expect him to do unusual things if he showed up in person. So maybe you're surprised that Jesus turned water into wine. Ordinarily impossible. But I think there's another surprise here. And one of my friends put it this way. He said he wasn't so much surprised that Jesus had turned water into wine. Rather, for him, the surprise was that Jesus wasn't instead going around turning all the wine into water. Don't be too impressed. That was just vinegar in there, so it went acidic again. But the point wasn't God supposed to be the cosmic killjoy? His greatest fear was that someone somewhere in the world might be having fun, and he needed to immediately stamp it out. I mean, this is the view of Christians, isn't it? When is the last time you heard people say, oh, I went to this party at the weekend, or how was it? Oh, it was a bit flat, because unfortunately no Christians were there. It's not the stereotype, is it? You know, the Christians are the one that give the party a swing. But Jesus is at a party that is going really badly, and his mother knows that he can solve it, and he does. And he solves it by making a really quite embarrassingly, eye-watering amount of wine. I mean, there's a lot of wine at this wedding. I mean, here are these 6 stone water jars, each holding up to 120 litres. You can do the math. This is like 800 bottles or something. I mean, this is a lot of wine for a small village in Galilee. Isn't Jesus supposed to be against that kind of thing? And if your stereotype of God is he's anti-fun, and I'll be honest, that was my view of it. I had these kind of objections to Jesus scientifically about the miracles and so on. But my real objection for Jesus at university was just the fear that he might wreck my life. If Christianity had a colour, it would be grey. If you could sum up Christian ethics in a word, it would be don't. Now, I thought that being a Christian would mean ill-advised fashion choices, socks combined with sandals. It would mean swapping your wine cellar for bottles of Schlur, which one of my friends calls Christian champagne. It would mean your favourite TV programme suddenly becomes songs of praise. Isn't it just like that? Isn't it there to suck the joy out of your life? And when I looked at what Jesus was actually like, it's quite surprising. I mean, sure, the Bible does warn against drunkenness, but actually alcohol used badly can really hurt people. And maybe you know that. I certainly can think of one family that I know and love whose life was completely destroyed by alcohol. I mean, it can be fun, but used badly, it can really hurt people. And the same is true of sex. I mean, God invented sex. Why do you think we have particular parts of our body that feel good? If God is the creator of bodies, he designed bodies like this. And here's wine and a wedding. Here is alcohol and sex. God is not against sex. He's not sort of prudish. But sex used badly can really hurt people. And, we know that, don't we? I just have to say the names Harvey Weinstein or Jimmy Savile. Sex used badly can be really bad. But sex enjoyed rightly can be a gift of God. Wine enjoyed rightly can be a gift of God. And Jesus is pro-joy. Maybe that is a surprise to you. But there's 2 even more surprising things, and they're kind of hidden below the surface. We need to look even more closely at these verses. Here's the first one. Just look again at the story, at the episode, and ask yourself, whose job at the wedding does Jesus take on? Or whose shoes does Jesus step into at this wedding? Just see if you can work it out. Have a look down. First century weddings don't have quite the same conventions as our weddings, but you can work it out if you think hard. Whose job does Jesus do? Well, you can work it out by asking, who gets congratulated for providing the really excellent wine at this wedding? And the answer is the bridegroom. Because in first century weddings, that you divide up the labour, it was the bridegroom's job to sort out the reception. And this guy has made a complete horlicks of it. Jesus steps in as the bridegroom and sorts it out. Now, maybe you don't think much of that. Okay, so what? Jesus, he does the bridegroom job for a day secretly. As you read on in John's account, you get to the next chapter, and we meet a man called John the Baptist, who was actually a very famous preacher in the first century. Huge crowds used to follow him. And he says, actually, no, I'm only playing second fiddle to Jesus. I'm playing the bit part. Jesus is the main show. So this sensationally famous public speaker says, you want to follow him, points to Jesus. And he gives this analogy. He says, if this were a wedding, Jesus would be the bridegroom, and I would just be the best man. I've got a role in the wedding. I'm the bridegroom's friend, but the bridegroom is the main show. So it's the same idea again. Jesus is at a wedding, he's the bridegroom, then his friend describes Jesus as a bridegroom. You turn to chapter 4, we're not going to read the whole thing, but I'll tell you what happens, you can read it later. Jesus gets a girlfriend. I'll say that to slightly surprise you, and it really does surprise. It slightly shocks everybody. Jesus is out one day, he's at a well. In the Bible, quite a lot of people have their first dates at wells. You need to know that background. It's a kind of famous first date location in the Jewish part of the Bible. Jesus meets a woman at a well, but a very surprising woman, not the kind of person they'd had in mind for Jesus, maybe. A woman who'd lived a pretty disastrous life romantically. A woman who Jesus knows just by looking at her has had 5 husbands, is now on her 6th man, not made a great success of relationships. And the disciples come back, they see Jesus talking intimately with this woman. They're very shocked. Jesus, you want to introduce us to somebody? They say. And in the course of the conversation, Jesus offers this woman a relationship. Not a sexual relationship with him as a human being, but a spiritual relationship with the God that made her. A God that she didn't think would be interested in her because she was the wrong side of the tracks. She'd messed up her life, rather. She hadn't lived the model Christian life. And Jesus meets her and shows compassion to her, knows all about her past, and offers her a relationship with God. And again in the Bible, God chooses to describe this relationship with him like a marriage, like a wedding. That's why Jesus deliberately steps into the bridegroom's shoes at the wedding. Jesus says to know God would be like being married. And again, maybe that is a surprise to you. I don't know what analogy you would expect God to give to what it would be like to know him. Would it be like we're students in a school and he is a really strict headmaster, ready to tell us all off? Or would it be that we are the underlings in a company and he's the CEO or something? The Bible again and again says it's like we're a bride and he's a bridegroom. And he wants a marriage. I'm not married, I'm single, but I see Christian marriages from a distance. And I see a secure, in fact, the most secure relationship that this world knows, till death us do part. I see a committed, intimate, the most intimate relationship. I used to think that Christians had a really sad view of sex. I've hinted at this already. I used to think Christians were losers because they were so restrictive about sex. And I had friends at university, who sleep with loads of people. I thought they were the heroes. And then, 20 years later, I realized that the people who slept with whoever they wanted have got hurt a lot and hurt other people a lot. And the sex that was in a relationship with one person that you love for your whole life was actually the most intimate, the most beautiful, the most secure one of all. And Jesus says that's what it's like to know me. That's surprising, isn't it? To be able to know God personally and intimately. I remember the first time I kind of realized this. I was at university here in Cambridge. I was, as I say, a skeptic, an atheist at points. Came to this church, heard the talk a bit like this one. And I met people who talked as though they knew God personally, like we just heard from Dano just now. And I thought, the way they're speaking, I wonder whether they actually might do. A relationship with him. 3 surprises. There's one more to come, but 3 so far. It's surprising that Jesus can do things that are ordinarily impossible. But if he's God, wouldn't you expect something a bit unusual like that? Secondly, it's surprising that Jesus is pro-parties and pro-sex. Maybe if we thought that he was a killjoy, this is very surprising. He's not turning the wine into water. Thirdly, surprising that what Jesus wants with us is not just to be some sort of tyrannical egomaniac to rule us all like little servants, but a bridegroom wanting an intimacy with us that we might know our Creator personally. And the last surprise is just how much it's going to cost Jesus to do that. And it's actually just hidden as a little hint in this passage. And it's this rather weird reply that Jesus makes to his mother. So Mary realizes that the wedding's going to be a disaster, and she says, Jesus, can you help? There's no more wine. And he says, verse 4, just back on page 4, Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come. I don't think this is as rude in first century language as it would sound now. If I said to my mother, woman, I would, she'd clip me around the ear, I think. In that culture, I think woman is a very respectful way to address a lady. You might say madam or ma'am or, I don't know. It's culturally non-offensive. But the surprising thing is what Jesus means by it's not time yet. Mother, woman, it's not time yet. My hour hasn't come yet. And she's thinking, no, Jesus, it really is time. Like, they've run out of wine. People are going to notice. The wedding's going to be very embarrassing. It's time now. Jesus goes, no, it's not time. And he says it's not time, and then he does it anyway. So what does he mean by this weird phrase, my hour hasn't come? Well, at this stage, it's just a puzzle, and we don't really know. But then, as you read on, and I really hope I've whet your appetite enough that you want to keep reading. As you keep reading, this phrase comes up a few more times. Because here in the wedding at Cana, Jesus is quite discreet, and he does it behind the scenes. Later, when Jesus comes out into public, he really upsets people. He steps on a lot of toes. He says a lot of things people would prefer he didn't say. There's a lot of awkward social situations, and so much so that Jesus calls out hypocrisy in religious people in particular, and they hate it. And we read that they wanted to stone him in chapter 7. They tried to seize him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. Same phrase. Over the page in chapter 8, the same thing again. Jesus being even more controversial, and yet we read, yet no one seized him because his hour had not yet come. So this hour hasn't come. It's kind of in the context of people wanting to grab Jesus, to arrest Jesus, to kill Jesus. But they couldn't yet because his hour hadn't yet come. And then we get to the climax of the story in chapter 12, about halfway through. And then the last week of Jesus' life takes up half of this book. And in the last week of Jesus' life, the last couple of days of Jesus' life, he says, now the hour has come. What hour? Well, the hour when the Son of Man, when Jesus is going to be glorified. How will Jesus be glorified? He says, I'll be glorified by being lifted up. It's a very clever, sort of ambiguous turn of phrase there. Because, you could lift someone up, like a football match, or a hero, and you lift him up high. But Jesus lifting up high looks a bit more like this. He will be lifted up. He'll be glorified as he's nailed to a cross. Now my hour has come, he says. Now, let's just try and connect it all. Jesus is at a wedding. His mother says, this is your moment, son. This is your moment. He says, no, my moment is going to cost me my life. To be the bridegroom, to offer a relationship, to bring people into relationship with God who've lived messed up lives. Not just victims of abuse, but abusers. Not just people who've been wronged, but people who've wronged others. And of course, all of us are mixtures of the two, aren't we? I've hurt people and other people have hurt me. To bring people like that into a relationship with God. To meet a woman who's just totally messed up all of her relationships. You've had 5 husbands and now you're on your 6th man, says Jesus. And she knows that. She thinks God would not be interested in me. It turns out God is very interested in her, as in all of us. But to bring somebody like that into this marriage, this relationship with God, is going to cost Jesus his life. And the climax of this story, it starts with a wedding. And it doesn't quite end with a funeral. Almost at the end is a funeral. As Jesus is glorified. As Jesus makes possible this relationship at the cost of his own death. Now, I remember this for me, as I was looking into Christian things, this was the clincher for me. Because I got convinced quite early on, looking into Jesus, that it made philosophical sense. Like Dano, I thought about my own atheism. I thought it doesn't really have foundations that make sense. But Christianity kind of hangs together. I can see that philosophically. I began to realize it made sense historically. Like last night's talk, I found some of this evidence. I can really trust this happened. But I wanted to keep it at arm's length because I thought Jesus might just wreck my life. It's true, maybe it's true, but I just don't think it's good. And the clincher for me was just thinking about what it cost Jesus to offer me what he's offering me. It cost him his life, given up on a cross, so that we could have a relationship. And I just remember I was in my room at St. John's back in 1994, just kind of thinking through the logic. Why would somebody die for me if he just wanted to destroy me? Doesn't make sense. Now, why would he pay such a price if his ambition was just little servants running around to suck the joy from? And I just realized he must really love people to do this. He must be really for me. He's not anti-joy, but he's pro-sex and marriage and parties and this relationship with God. And so I don't know whether I've persuaded you of everything tonight. I hope I've made you curious. And this is my ambition really for you today. I mean, maybe someone thinks, oh, the penny's dropped. This is the last stage in my whole thought process. Maybe someone like that here today. For lots of people, I think it might just be that you just dismiss Jesus. And I hope you're a bit more curious about him. I hope some of your preconceptions about Jesus turned out to be wrong. And you want to think again. And I hope you're this is the first of the talks over this weekend. I hope you're curious enough to think, I wonder what happens on the other pages of this book. If page 4 was that interesting, I wonder what the rest of it's like. And you can find out by coming and hearing me talk about other bits of it, or you could just take this home and read it yourself, and either would be great. I'm going to hand back over to hear a bit more about what's happening next.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. A big thanks to you all for coming. I've just got a couple of things to say before we leave. So the first one is just to come back. As Andrew said, this is the first of our series of talks. So we've got some talks tomorrow. And on Sunday, our services in the morning at 10 a.m. and 11:45. Would you trust Jesus to be in charge? What does it look like with Jesus in charge? That's on Sunday. And at 5 o'clock in the evening, we've got our evening service. Why did Jesus die? Those are great things to come back to, and we'd really love to see you there. Second thing to say is do have a look at our bookstall. We've got a little bookstall at the back. We've got, as I mentioned, Andrew's book here, Are You 100% Sure You Want to Be an Agnostic?, which tonight is totally free. So do go to the back, grab a copy of this, and there's books on a variety of other topics as well. There should be 3 things on your chair. As Andrew said, there's a copy of John's Gospel, this eyewitness biography that we've been looking at this evening. This is yours to take away, have a read of it. And do take that away with you. Secondly, there's a card that looks a little bit like this, an invitation to real-life Jesus. Every Monday evening in June, we've just got a chance to kind of come back in here, hear a little bit more about the claims of Jesus in a slightly more informal way, with some questions, discussion time, just think a bit more about the claims that Jesus makes. And finally, there's a little green card. We'd love to know your feedback on the event, any thoughts you have, any questions. If you've got questions that you'd like to chat more about, do write them down, pop your contact details on there, and someone from church can get in touch. Well, that's all from me. Thanks so much for coming. I hope to see you again soon.